prosecutors once again can't convict a high-profile politician charged with corruption. We've talked about this endlessly on this program. Shelley Silver, Dean Skelos had their convictions overturned. That after a Supreme Court ruling basically redefined what corruption is. And the feds couldn't convince, I should say, a jury to actually convict Senator Menendez, as we told you off the top of the show. Once again, Supreme Court case involving former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell played a huge role. So the question is, where do we and they go from here? Well, former federal prosecutor Daniel Goldman joins us right now. Daniel, I want to get into the why and also the what next maybe for prosecutors, but first the what. 10-2, the jury was ready to vote for acquittal here. What does the math tell you that at least within the deliberation room, they didn't think the prosecution came close to meeting their burden?
No, that's not a good number for the prosecution, and that's something that they will certainly consider when they're evaluating whether or not they want to go forward with a retrial. Only 2 for conviction is pretty low in terms of how hung juries usually work out in a federal criminal case like this.
Take me behind the door when it closes after they do all the necessary explainers or attempts to the press as to why the jury didn't come back with the verdict they had hoped. When they sit in the room together and they look at each other, do they say, let's move on, let's try and retry, maybe we'll try and work out some plea deal with Menendez, maybe we'll drop some of the charges? Where do you think they go from here?
Well, they're certainly going to have to regroup and try to figure out if there is a path forward that can result in a conviction. They will evaluate a variety of different things. They know the jury well by this point. They know the individuals, and they can try to make a determination as to whether the particular individuals had something to do with it. They will reevaluate the judge's rulings, which you never really know what they will be until the trial occurs, and there may be some rulings that significantly impaired their case. They will certainly want to consider a plea here. Perhaps Senator Menendez would plead guilty to just failing to disclose the gifts that his co-defendant gave him. But again, with only 2 voting for conviction, Senator Menendez is in the catbird seat, and he really controls what happens here. And I would imagine it's highly unlikely that he would take any guilty plea at this point.
You know, Daniel, it's interesting. I've had, I don't know, 20, 30 politicians on over the course of this trial in states where obviously they've had their own history of corruption, not personally, but as legislative bodies. And I'll get 20 different answers for what they believe the definition of corruption is right now, between stream of benefits, quid pro quo. Since the McDonnell decision by the Supreme Court, does anybody really know what the definition of corruption actually is now, or is it still subject to interpretation?
It's certainly subject to interpretation, and particularly in a world of bribery and corruption and public officials, where in this case really showed exactly why it's a case-by-case situation. These gentlemen were friends prior to Senator Menendez becoming a politician. Friends are allowed to give gifts to friends. That's not illegal. And you also have a situation where Senator Menendez may be doing official acts that benefit a friend, but it may benefit others. And what the McDonnell case really has done is it has narrowed the world in which gifts must be linked by a direct quid pro quo to public official acts. And in this case, where you didn't have a smoking gun email or audio recording or a text message or any real communication between the 2 defendants outlining their conspiracy, it was essentially a circumstantial case where the prosecution had to weave together testimony from a variety of different witnesses, emails from a variety of different witnesses. You don't have a smoking gun situation where they established a quid pro quo, and the defense lawyers did a very good job of pointing that out to the jury to say, hey, these guys were friends beforehand, they're still friends, and you've got nothing that you can hang your hat on and feel good about convicting this person for acting with an improper purpose in response to the gifts. And this is certainly about McDonnell to some degree because it does narrow the pathway for prosecutors, but this is also about this particular case, which is more of a circumstantial case case than you see in a lot of federal prosecutions.
But certainly, Daniel, on the heels of what we saw with Silver and Skelos, and I know those were different because obviously the McDonald ruling and the impact of the charge through the jury, I get that. But you, for nearly 10 years, were in the U.S. Attorney's Office, and you got some major scalps. I mean, you put away Russian mobsters, you put away the head of the Genovese crime family. It might sound like an odd question, but is it harder today to actually convict a politician of corruption than it is to break up organized crime?
Well, it probably is harder, in part because there's such a fine line between official acts and just regular campaign donations. You know, friends certainly donate to potential candidates and politicians, and that's okay. There really dovetails between sort of campaign finance laws and bribery and corruption. And because it's so permissive under the campaign finance laws to make donations and to do things for friends on a personal level, it is very difficult to show a direct quid pro quo, and that's why texts, emails, and recordings in particular are so much more important in cases like this, or of course a cooperating witness, which is someone who admits to committing the crime, admits to giving gifts in return for public official acts. That's obviously great evidence, and the prosecution didn't have any of that here. It doesn't mean they didn't have a good case. It just means that it's not as easy as some of the other cases that you may see.
Daniel, I appreciate the time. Great job. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, coming up next, the House, they just passed the Republican tax bill. It includes a whole lot of things that will help a whole lot of wealthy people and corporations, but for people in our area, millions of people in our area, they may come out on the short end of the stick. Congressman Joe Crowley from New York, he'll join me next. He was a resounding no vote today. He'll explain why.